small children and to their futures. Soldiers speak out. Soldiers speak out. Soldiers speak out. Soldiers speak out.
Hello and welcome to another monthly presentation of the Veterans for Peace Hour, presented by the Veterans for Peace Chapter 109, the Rachel Corrie chapter in Olympia, Washington. We greatly appreciate the Thurston County Television, TCTV, that makes it possible for us to produce these monthly programs. I'm Dennis Mills, a veteran for Peace and co-founder of this chapter. In previous programs, we've covered a number of subjects that address the purposes of Veterans for Peace, and I'd like to show you those statements that we have. The first slide says one of our purposes is towards increasing the public awareness of the costs of war. And the second one is to restrain our government from intervening overtly and covertly in the internal affairs of other nations. Also, to end the arms race and to reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. A fourth statement is to abolish war as an instrument of national policy. And also to make nonviolent conflict resolution an integral part of national policy. And finally, to seek justice for veterans and victims of war. Today, we are pleased to share with you a presentation that we filmed at Traditions Cafe on March 10th. Our guest presenter, Father Roy Bourgeois, is a Maryknoll priest, and he addressed one of the purposes we tend not to really touch on too much with Veterans for Peace, and it is that second purpose. Let me show you that slide again. It is to restrain our government from intervening overtly and covertly in the internal affairs of other nations. Father Roy also spoke at South Sound Community College and the Evergreen State College on March 10th. Father Roy Bourgeois, and I'll show you a picture of him, you'll see him shortly. Father Roy Bourgeois is a former naval officer, a Vietnam veteran, also a member of Veterans for Peace, and a recipient of the Purple Heart. He's also been called the Patriot Priest and a voice of the voiceless for the people of South America. He's also called the father of the movement to close the School of Americas. Father Roy is the driving force behind SOA Watch. Maybe you've seen this on your computers. I'll show a slide of the particular site here, the SOA Watch. It works as a nonviolent grassroots movement that works through creative protest and resistance, legislative and media work to stand in solidarity with the people of Latin America, particularly to close SOA/now WINSEC, WHINSEC, to change the oppressive U.S. foreign policy that institutions like SOA represent. In South America, it's really known as the School of Assassins. In the summer of 2000, Congress closed the School of Americas for one day, and then reopened it under a new name, WINSEC, Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. I assure you, the name was changed, but certainly not to protect the innocent. In 1983, Father Roy Bourgeois entered the School of Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia, by impersonating an officer, and you'll probably get a little giggle as you hear him tell of his exploit. Father Bourgeois then climbed a tree next to the Salvadoran barracks and loudly played the last sermon of Archbishop Oscar Romero. The Activist Priest Act was punished by 18 months in a federal prison. 7 years later, Father Bourgeois moved into an apartment just across the street from the School of America, with 9 other activists concerned with the training facility's direct role in Latin America's dirty wars. He founded the School of America Watch, and ever since that time, the organization has grown into a broad grassroots movement seeking to close down the School of Americas for good. I know you'll be moved, as we were, to hear Father Bourgeois share his story of his work and the people of South America. Please join us now as we share with you his experiences of how our government is overtly and covertly intervening in the countries of South America.
I wanted to tell you a little bit about Veterans for Peace before I introduce Father Roy, because he's bringing something to Olympia tonight that our chapter has been unable to do. Our chapter has, and this is available, the lovely Catherine has it in the back on her little table, and this is a brochure of our chapter's mission statement, the kinds of things we're involved with, and I'd like to review with you just briefly a couple of things that our chapter holds dearly. We, having dutifully served our nation, do hereby affirm our greater responsibility to serve the cause of world peace. And to this end, we will work with others. 1, to work toward increasing the awareness of the cost of war. Father Roy will be doing that tonight. We've done that in our community. We seek justice for veterans and all victims of war. We've done that in this community. When we do Arlington Northwest, part of that is to recognize the people who've died, the people that most people forget about. The thing that's really exciting for me tonight is Vets for Peace is reaching out to somebody who is showing us that there is hope for us to make things different. And that's Father Roy. And our purpose is to restrain our government in intervening overtly and covertly in the internal affairs of other nations. That's what Father Roy's work has done. And I'd like to introduce Father Roy, and he has been at this work for decades. And I just want to tell you a little bit about him, and he's going to tell you his story. His story is one of a veteran who's changed by war. He is known as the Patriot Priest. He's known as the voice of the voiceless. He is a former Navy officer, Vietnam veteran, recipient of the Purple Heart. He is a Veteran of Peace member. He is the founder of SOA, School of America's Watch, and he has a book here that he'll be showing you today that refers to him as the father of the movement to close the School of the Americas. And he's in the process of doing that. And that's the lesson that I believe that we can take away from this. If we do what he did, not quit, keep going, work together, we can be successful. I'd like to introduce Father Roy Bourgeois.
Thank you very much. I just want to say it's a great joy, a blessing, an honor to be with you. I want to thank the Vets for Peace first for their great work, their faithfulness to peace, peacemaking. Jim James, who called me months ago to come here. I also want to thank the warm hospitality of the folks here at Traditions. What can really be more important for us than to come together at this moment in our country's history, at this time in our own journey, to talk about peace. Once again, our countries at war. This time it's Iraq. We all know those stories of so many and see those images on our TV about so many sisters and brothers here at home and other countries who are the victims of violence, and how the billions of dollars that we are spending for war must simply be said that every dollar is a theft from those who hunger, who lack adequate housing, here at home and elsewhere. It took me a long time to get on that road to peace. Growing up in that little town of Louisiana, midway between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, we didn't talk about peace, solidarity with the poor. We did not critique our country's foreign policy. I went to the State University and got a degree in geology, thinking perhaps of getting rich in the oil fields of South America. When I left college, Vietnam was on. Being a patriotic young man, it was very easy to join the military. I was kind of taught that along the way. When your country needs you, you sign up. And I bought into that lie, what they were saying about Vietnam, the same words that we used to justify the invasion of Iraq. Our leaders told us that our cause would be a noble one. We were going to be the liberators. I often think about the words of that Old Testament prophet Isaiah, who said it so well. They will take evil and call it good. And something happened there in Vietnam as is happening to us in Iraq. I have simply come to the conclusion, as many have, we as human beings are not made for war. We cannot go about the business of killing and go on with our lives as before. We will forever be changed, as will our loved ones. We have what we call conscience. We've got this heart, hopefully, that's filled with compassion for others. We have this sensitivity to suffering. And it was the violence in Vietnam, the suffering that I saw there, and the many victims who are there, the majority civilians, the children. I've come to a couple of conclusions, and it was the beginning of something that was stirring up in my life there in Vietnam. And I say this to high school students where I speak, college students, that when leaders of our country tell you that we've got to go to war, and they use that collective we, and that macho talks about staying the course and being strong, they're not talking about themselves. Those who declare the war will not go and fight it, nor will their sons and daughters go. They will send you. They will remain in the comforts of their homes and secure. And we better know what they are asking us to do or telling us to do in the name of patriotism. And I've come to see that as being very cowardly, really, very cowardly. And I, like many, as a Catholic priest and many people of faith in our country, coming from many faith traditions, are very, very disappointed, sad, and angered by the silence of our spiritual leaders. It's like Iraq does not exist. And during the days of Vietnam, it was the same. In the Catholic Church, the bishops, the cardinals, were silent. Cardinal Spellman, I remember, arrived in Vietnam to bless the tanks and bless us with our M16s. Came back home and said nothing against the madness and the suffering and the death that was going on there. And that's happening again in Iraq. And I'm often asked as I travel as a Catholic priest, where are our bishops? Where are our clergy? And I hear this as I speak in Protestant churches. Where are our leaders? They are silent. And I think of the words of Henry David Thoreau, who said some of the biggest cowards he ever met were church leaders. And that's been my experience. But something more serious too. Our spiritual leaders have become corporate executives. Our shepherds have become government sheep. And we cannot wait for them to speak. We must speak out if they are not, and if they are, we have to call them to task. And I said this in Nashville, Tennessee just recently. I had so many complaints against the bishop there, and all I could think of was you should get together a group, a delegation, to go to your bishop or any other church leader or spiritual leader who's silent, to meet with him or her and simply say that you have a responsibility with that office that you hold. And if you don't have the courage to speak out, please have the courage to step down and turn over that position to someone who will have the courage to speak. My hope is strong because I see a lot of people from the base. What I've learned too is change will not come from the top down, from our politicians or from church leaders. It will come from the bottom up. It will come from us. I lost my hope in Vietnam, and this is what war does. It kills hope. But I met someone there who kind of rekindled my hope. It was inspiring. I'd never met someone like him before. He was a Catholic priest of the Redemptorist Order from Canada, working near our base at this orphanage, caring for about 300 children whose parents were killed. And I and my buddies would go there to help out. And he wasn't trying to convert anyone. He was a healer, a true healer. He was a true peacemaker, the first one I had ever met. And he stood out in the midst of the war. And I looked at his life and said, what a wonderful way to spend one's life. And I'd like to try and do that with my own, not knowing where it was going to lead. My year was coming to an end. I talked to an army chaplain about missionary work, peacekeeping, peacemaking, healing. He mentioned the Maryknoll community, and I said, Mary who? I'd never heard of this group. Working in 25 countries around the world, serving the poor. I came home, my year was up, so grateful to be alive, to be back with my close-knit family in Louisiana, with friends, and then headed off to a seminary out east. And it was like a new chapter. It was exciting. I had something to look forward to. This hope that I once had and had lost is now coming back. It was in the seminary 3 years after I got back from Vietnam. I went on my very first demonstration. I think we can all perhaps look back on our own journey and think about the first time we protested, we spoke up. And that is a sacred moment, and I know it was for me. A lot of veterans coming back from Vietnam took to the streets, along with tens of thousands of people. We went to Washington, one of the many protests, and I stood with many in front of the White House with a sign that said, peace, peace. Bring the troops home. It's that day. And what I also found was hope, hope. When we come together like that, or this evening, or there at the university where I was at Evergreen there, I felt hope because we were there talking, reflecting about how we can be peacemakers, how we can stop war. My studies came to an end. I was ordained a Catholic priest and now assigned to our missions in Bolivia. First stop was language school in Cochabamba. I'm well known at that school for being the worst student to ever have studied there. When I spoke Spanish, when I left, they thought I was speaking this indigenous language. I went to La Paz and settled into the barrio there. where the poor became my teachers. This is home for the next 5 years. And this is what happens when we dare to put our feet in the culture of others, especially the poor. They will teach us so much. They introduced to me their struggle, a struggle for liberation, a struggle for peace. They, like most people in the developing world, struggling for survival. In the shacks without electricity, not having schools for their kids. When they were sick, there wasn't a clinic to go to get those needed medicines. And so many were not making it beyond the age of 4 or 5. And there in their country, in Bolivia, there was this brutal dictator, General Hugo Banzer, a good friend of the United States, one of the many dictators that we were supporting. Nearby, next door, Chile with the Augusto Pinochet, and in Peru, Guatemala, El Salvador, and the list went on and on. We were on the side of the aristocracy, the oligarchies, and the militaries that really dominated those countries, that kept the rich rich and the poor poor. It wasn't complicated what was going on in Bolivia. People who suffer the way they suffered will do what we would do. They would organize at the university, in the tin mines, in the factories. They will come together to speak about justice and peace. They will talk about the living wage and land reform. And when they do, they're seen as subversive. They're seen as el enemigo. They threaten that system. And many were arrested, some killed, many exiled. And it was in my 5th year where my life had meaning. I felt what we were doing was important. I found a new family there. But it was in my 5th year that I was among the many arrested, and I had to come home. Could not return to Bolivia. It was the old persona non grata. And it was a difficult time, very lonely time. But my attention turned to El Salvador with many. A country far worse than the one I came from. In El Salvador, we had 14 families owning 60% of the land. When we went to El Salvador, we found the slaughter of the innocents. I've never seen anything like El Salvador. I was more frightened there than Vietnam. Archbishop Oscar Romero had been assassinated for his defense of the poor. 4 churchwomen who went there to work with the poor from our country, 2 of them Marino sisters who were good friends, were raped and killed by the Salvadoran military. And when that happened, it brought us closer to El Salvador. And when we went there, we found once again our country, the United States, giving guns and training to those soldiers at war with their people, those doing the killing. When we came back from El Salvador, we felt we had to speak out. How could we not? So we traveled to colleges and churches and peace groups. And when we heard that 525 soldiers, when we read in the New York Times, had just arrived at Fort Benning, Georgia, I and others canceled our speaking tours and headed south to Fort Benning in the state of Georgia. And we organized. We got a house there called Casa Romero. And started visiting churches and colleges, speaking to whoever would listen to the message. Some opened up their schools and churches to us. Others didn't want. It was too controversial. And after a couple of months of speaking out, we decided to take the message to the Salvadoran soldiers now on Fort Benning. And our little group of 3 was Linda Ventimiglia, who had trained at Fort Benning, now in the Army Reserves. Larry Rosebaum, who had just come back from his work in Brazil, and I. We went down to this Army surplus place, Ranger Joe's. We bought ourselves some Army uniforms. And a few nights later, we entered Fort Benning dressed as high-ranking Army officers. We had, my only regret, I had the rank of colonel. I should have gone in as a general. We had with us this very powerful boombox, a player with the last sermon of Bishop Romero in Spanish in there. It was his last speech, his sermon that he gave in the cathedral the day before he was assassinated, where he made his special plea to the military, saying to them, stop the killing. Lay down your weapons. Disobey your superior officers telling you to kill your fellow campesinos. And obey a higher law that says thou shalt not kill. Bishop Romero, you can speak for hours about, write books about as many books have been written. He was a prophet. He was a martyr for the cause. And yet he was so much like us. He was very silent, aloof. They said he was a bookworm. When he was made bishop, the oligarch at the military there said, we've got a friend. This new Bishop Oscar Romero will not give us problems. And sometimes I think in order to be made into a bishop, that's the prerequisite. You have to be silent, aloof. You can't be known for your work with the poor or for human rights. But Bishop Romero, something happened along the way. He had this big heart filled with compassion. And he was silent, but it was short-lived. He began to hear the cry of his people. More important, he felt their suffering as they were killed. And he came out with things like this. He said, I have a voice. I must speak for my people who are voiceless. I have power and my people are powerless. And he was getting death threats as he spoke clearly and boldly. And they said, Oscar, you've got to get out of the country. And he said, no, where am I to go? How am I going to, abandon my people? And he kept his hands on the plow. And then it was the next day after his plea to the military to stop the killing, he was assassinated. And he did say just days before he was killed, they can kill me, but I will live on in the Pueblo, in the lives of others. And how true it is. The martyrs, they stretch us. They give us the courage we often lack. And we felt the spirit of Romero with us that night when we entered Fort Benning. We entered this high security area, got saluted. It was a shaky salute. Went into the wooded area where the barracks were located and the 525 soldiers were. And with tree climbers, we scaled this tall pine and waited. And about 11 o'clock at night, when the lights went out, we just said, Bishop Romero, this is for you, brother. And boomed his voice into the barracks. And they were pretty upset. It was like poking a beehive. It just came out all over with their guns and their dogs and the lights spotting us in the tree. And they said, come down or we're going to shoot you.